There was a war America never truly won. And some say it was never meant to be won, not in the jungles, not in the hearts, and certainly not in history. The year was 1965. The Vietnam War, one of the most costly and controversial conflicts in American history. Despite overwhelming firepower and modern technology, the United States failed to achieve victory. Young American soldiers, barely out of high school, boarded planes bound for a distant land most had never heard of, Vietnam. They arrived with rifles slung, boots clean, and the belief that they were fighting for freedom, that they were the good guys. The U.S. military entered Vietnam confident in its superiority. But they underestimated the Viet Cong's knowledge of the terrain, guerrilla tactics, and commitment to their cause. These local fighters used hit-and-run strategies, booby traps, and underground tunnels to outmaneuver U.S. forces. But what the American troops stepped into was not a war like any they'd known. It wasn't just the heat or the endless green that swallowed helicopters whole. It was the enemy, invisible, everywhere, and never where you thought they'd be. The Viet Cong didn't fight in formation. They fought in shadows. They used tunnels beneath the earth, ambushes in the treetops, and traps that turned every step into a gamble with death. Vietnam's dense jungles, muddy rivers, and monsoon rains created a logistical nightmare. American troops, used to conventional warfare, struggled in a landscape designed for ambushes and concealment. The U.S. strategy in Vietnam wasn't to win outright, but to prevent a communist takeover. This led to mission creep and a lack of measurable success on the battlefield. Winning hearts and minds proved much harder than anticipated. Despite superior firepower and technology, U.S. troops couldn't pin them down. Every hill taken was lost days later. Every village liberated was retaken by nightfall. And then came the doubt. This war was broadcast live into American homes. Unlike the World Wars, this conflict had a front row seat on television: the blood, the body bags, the burning villages. Unlike previous wars, Vietnam was televised. Graphic images and daily death tolls were broadcast into American living rooms. As the war dragged on, public support waned, and protests grew louder. This ultimately pressured political leaders to pull back. And slowly, the American people began to ask, why are we here? What are we fighting for? Are we winning? The answers never came clearly. Not from the Pentagon. Not from the White House. Behind the scenes, generals clashed with politicians. They wanted decisive strikes into Laos, Cambodia, but the war was politically boxed in. It wasn't about victory anymore, it was about not losing. And that's the worst kind of war. Then came the Tet Offensive. The North Vietnamese launched a surprise attack during a holiday truce. Cities once thought secure erupted in gunfire. It shook the American public. If this was supposed to be a war we were winning, why did it feel like we were losing every day? Morale crumbled. Soldiers returned home, not to parades, but protests. The war that was supposed to stop communism instead divided a nation. Brothers stopped talking. Fathers stopped believing. And the young men who survived often came back only half whole. 10 years after it began, America left Vietnam. Not with a victory parade, but with the desperate thrum of helicopter blades over a falling city. Saigon fell. And with it, the illusion that America was invincible. American forces were often limited in where they could strike, especially in neighboring countries like Laos and Cambodia. Eventually, with no decisive victory in sight and domestic unrest boiling over, the U.S. began a gradual withdrawal, culminating in the fall of Saigon in 1975. The Vietnam War wasn't just lost on the battlefield. It was lost in the halls of power, in the living rooms of America, and in the hearts of soldiers who were asked to win the unwinnable. Because in Vietnam, it was never just about who had more guns. It was about who had more to lose and more to endure. The Vietnam War was a wake-up call. It showed that military strength alone isn't enough to guarantee victory. Strategy, terrain, public opinion, and understanding your enemy are just as crucial. This is Battles of History, where the past still speaks if we choose to listen. Thank you for watching Battles of History. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more history come to light.